Today is July the 20th, and it's National Moon Day and National Lollipop Day. Whether you're looking up at the night sky or enjoying a sweet treat you picked up, a great day to rewind the clock. From one of humanity's greatest achievements to pivotal achievements to moments that helped shape the world. Let's take a look at what happened on this day in history. Welcome back to the Daily Rewind, a podcast where we rewind the time and take a look at what happened on this day in history. My name is Garrett. I'm your host. Let's get into it. Today is National Moon Day, and on this day in 1969, humanity achieved one of its greatest milestones when Neil Armstrong became the first person to walk on the moon. Over the years, the Apollo 11 mission has been the subject of conspiracy theories, claiming the moon landing was faked. However, the overwhelming historical and scientific evidence that's presented to us supports that the landing took place. Rather than focus on these claims, let's look at the achievement itself and the historic space race that made it possible. At 10:56 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on July 20th, 1969, with more than 1 billion people watching or listening around the world, Armstrong stepped off the lunar module Eagle and spoke the now famous words, "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." Just 15 minutes later, Buzz Aldrin joined the Armstrong. Oh my gosh. Just 15 minutes later, Buzz Aldrin joined Armstrong on the lunar surface. Together, the two astronauts photographed the landscape, planted the American flag, and conducted scientific experiments, collected lunar samples, and even spoke with President Richard Nixon by radio from the White House. After spending about 21 and a half hours on the moon, including roughly 2.5 hours outside the lunar module, they climbed back into the Eagle before leaving. They placed a commemorative plaque on the moon that read, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot on the moon, July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind." The Eagle then left it off from the lunar surface, successfully re-energized with the command module Columbia, where astronaut Michael Collins had been orbiting the moon alone, and began the journey home. And on July 24th, Apollo 11 safely splashed down the Pacific Ocean, completing one of the most remarkable missions in human history. The landing fulfilled the bold challenge President John F. Kennedy issued back on May 25th, 1961, when he declared before Congress, "I believe this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth." The mission was about more than exploration. It was about defining a moment in the Cold War as the United States and the Soviet Union competed for technological and scientific leadership. Apollo 11 proved the United States could achieve what had once seemed impossible. Apollo 11 was followed by 5 more successful moon landings between 1969 and 1972. The final astronauts to walk on the moon were Eugene Cernan and Harrison Schmitt of Apollo 17, departed the lunar surface on December 14, 1972. The Apollo program evolved an estimate 400,000 engineers, technicians, and scientists, and cost about $24 billion at the time, roughly $180 to $200 billion in today's dollars. While the expense was enormous, the program transformed science, engineering, computing, and space exploration, leaving a legacy that continues to inspire new missions to the moon more than a half century later and even to Mars. On this day in 1944 was one of the most daring plots to end World War II. It nearly changed history. Known as the July 20th plot, a group of high-ranking German military officers attempted to assassinate Adolf Hitler by hiding a bomb inside a briefcase. During a strategy meeting at his headquarters, the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia, the conspirators believed Hitler was leading Germany toward a certain destruction. And with Allied forces advancing from the west after D-Day, and the Soviet Red Army pushing in front and from the east, they concluded that Germany was fighting a hopeless war on 2 fronts. They believed that the only way to save their country was to kill Hitler, seize control of the government in a military coup, and negotiate peace with the Allies. The bomb did explode, as planned, but moments before the blast, the briefcase had been moved behind a heavy oak table leg, which shielded Hitler from the full force of the explosion. 4 people were killed and dozens were injured, but Hitler escaped with only minor wounds. The failed assassination had devastating consequences. Hitler used his survival as proof that fate was protecting him and launched a massive crackdown across Germany. More than 7,000 people were arrested and nearly 5,000 were executed or died as the result of the investigation, including many officers who had little or no involvement in the plot. Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg, who planted the bomb, was executed by a firing squad just hours after the coup collapsed. The failure of the July 20th plot ensured that Hitler remained in power until his suicide in April 1945, allowing the war in Europe to continue for another 9 months. During that time, millions more soldiers and civilians lost their lives, and much of Germany was left in ruins, before the Third Reich finally surrendered on May 8, 1945. And in 1654, England and Portugal strengthened one of Europe's oldest diplomatic relationships by signing a new treaty of peace and alliance. To understand why the agreement mattered, we have to go back to 1640, when Portugal rebelled against Spanish rule and restored its own monarchy under King John IV. Spain refused to recognize Portugal's independence, leaving Portuguese fighting to preserve it in what became known as the Portuguese Restoration War. Surrounded by powerful rivals and largely isolated in Europe, Portugal desperately needed foreign allies. Under the 1654 agreement, the English Commonwealth, led by Oliver Cromwell, established peace and closer relations with Portugal. England's support strengthened Portugal's international position while it continued resisting Spain. In return, Portugal granted extensive privileges to the English merchants operating in Portuguese operating in Portuguese territories and throughout parts of its overseas empire. English merchants gained greater protection for their ships, businesses, and property. They were also permitted to worship privately as Protestants, use English Bibles, and bury their dead according to their own religious customs. However, Portugal was a strongly Catholic country. Portugal also agreed to address claims from English merchants whose property had previously been confiscated. The agreement was not completely equal. Portugal gained a valuable diplomatic partner, but England secured major commercial advantages that increased its influence with Portugal in its global trading. Network. The treaty helped revive the historic Anglo-Portuguese alliance and laid the groundwork for even closer relations between the two countries during the following decades. Portugal ultimately preserved its independence, although Spain did not formally recognize it until 1668. The 1654 treaty, therefore, represented more than a trade agreement. It was an important step in Portugal's struggle for survival as an independent nation and in England's rise as a major commercial power. And that's going to wrap up today's episode. We'll see you tomorrow. Y'all have a great day. Thank you for listening to the Daily Rewind. If you enjoyed this show, please do not forget to subscribe to where you're listening at and give us a rating where you're listening at, whether that's Spotify or Apple. This helps us move up in the ratings and grow our show. We're also on social media at the Daily Rewind Pod. That's Daily Rewind Pod on all social media platforms. You have a great one. Until next time.